So I was thinking that I should make some kind of laws. We have like these laws in our society of rules and things like that. I know jaywalking, doing substances, and things like that. You also have like the Ten Commandments and whatnot. I didn't necessarily come up with 10 commandments for nature or like the laws of nature, but this is just kind of a general idea that I wanted to put out there for things that happen in nature. So the first one is going to be talking more about diet because that's something that I focus more on. Because if your diet isn't what comes naturally or isn't a natural diet for you as an animal, then you won't be able to live happily and you will suffer the consequences. So I would say that from nature's perspective, there's no such thing as good and evil, right? We've already talked about that. There's no such thing as good and bad, but there are certain things that I would say that will lead you to. So there's always consequences, like there's always a positive and a negative, or well, I guess I shouldn't even use that. There's always going to be some kind of repercussion that you would think is negative for your action. So, for example, if you choose to eat an unnatural diet, which most people do, especially if you just want to talk about the standard American diet, occasionally you go out and eat fast food, you eat the standard at home, you eat frozen chicken breasts and some broccoli every now and then, you have your spaghetti night for dinner sometimes, you go out and get some beef jerky from the liquor store, you pick up a Slurpee or something, right? So just general kind of diet type stuff like that. You go out to eat, you guys go get a steak at a steakhouse and you eat some bread that's given out there for free or whatever. All of this is a natural diet because the only natural diet for humans is raw animal products, but some of these choices and these foods that you eat will have certain benefits for you more than others will, right? So essentially, an animal who doesn't eat naturally, so like a lion who would eat a vegetarian diet, would suffer the consequences of being weaker, having a shorter life, and just overall being miserable throughout their life, so they wouldn't have a good quality of life, right? And they wouldn't be happy. Their mental state would be bad. They wouldn't be. They just wouldn't act naturally as a lion, right? So that's essentially from my perspective, that's essentially the first law of nature, is that if you don't do things that, like if you don't eat properly, like a natural diet, which is very hard for people to understand nowadays. Well, I guess it's not like super hard because you can see what animals eat and they eat naturally, right? Unless they're in a city. Like some of these birds probably don't eat some things that are natural, or like these squirrels, they probably pick up human food and things like that too, which isn't good for them. But yeah, essentially, if you don't eat properly, then you will be punished by nature with a shorter life, worse quality of life, being unhappy, and being weaker essentially. Another rule or another law of nature is there are no rules or laws. So in nature, like I said, there's no such thing as good and evil. All animals do whatever they want. That still applies to humans as well too. They essentially have the ability to do whatever they want. Now, does that mean, like I said in the first point as well too, is that there's not consequences? So, for example, if you were a tribe against a neighboring tribe and you caught one of their people, ended up torturing them, whatever, and put it on display for the other tribe. Yeah, there's still consequences for that. That other tribe might come out and wipe out your whole tribe. That's the consequence for it. Is what you did good or bad? No, it's not good or bad. It's just something that you felt like doing and you did it, and there was consequences for your actions essentially. Yeah, so I guess yes, this rule 2 was there is no rules. Rule 3 is kind of piggybacking off of that is you essentially do whatever you want. Like I said, there's no good or bad. If you want to go climb a tree and get coconuts out of it, then you can. Or if you want to go hunt an animal down, then you can as well too. There's no You basically just do whatever you want, and there's no perspective of what is good and bad. It's basically survival, which I guess could be I don't know. I feel like survival is kind of blend into all these as well too. Um, the rule 5 is you're free. You're essentially, or rule 4, you're essentially free to do whatever you want, but but you're still limited by your biological self, right? You still have some kind of limitations. There's not you're not gonna be, I don't know. I guess the definition of free is like however you take it, right? Um, the next law of nature is there's always life and death. There's always a cycle to everything. Um, that doesn't mean that they are opposites of each other because duality doesn't exist, right? But there's always a piece to the puzzle that every living being and part of the system plays a role in the whole system, right? It's like society, I guess, to some degree, but it's much more free, and obviously it's natural because it's nature. So yeah, there's always life and death. There's always the beginning and the end of everything, and there's always none of it really ever goes away, right? So like even when I pass away, I'll have children and things like that. Hopefully in the future, naturally speaking, man would have children and things like that, right? But when I pass away, I go into the earth, I go into the ground, I feed the bugs, the worms, the plants get nutrients off of what is left over from me, right? And I become that nutrients, and whatever the parts of me become part of the whole system again. I go back to the earth, right? I think even in the Bible, it says something like man was made from dust, and to dust he shall return. I think that's there are some things in the Bible that I kind of like, though, especially since I grew up being raised like that. So it's something interesting. There's good quotes in there. I can see why people like it, but yeah. So I guess my next point was everything is in a cycle, which kind of plays off the whole life and death thing. Is that everything does play a part in the whole of life. I would say too, I guess kind of thinking off the top of my head, is there will always be things that are unexplainable, because I think the human brain isn't meant to understand all of reality. It's not meant to explain everything around us. And I don't really know if that's necessarily a bad thing, because if we were to be able to explain everything, would that really be the human experience? And would that be the reality that we live in? There's definitely like restrictions, I guess you could call it. I don't know if you want to call it rules or whatever, if you lean towards more like a simulation idea of what our reality is and how it's how we interact with it and things like that, because there certainly are limitations biologically speaking and things like that, but because our world that we live in just has these certain yeah, I guess I would just call them restrictions. So but there's always going to be things that aren't explainable. I think that the human mind just can't really understand all the things, and I think it's kind of a cope to believe that you can. Because yeah, there's definitely a lot of things that are not explainable. I guess another thing, to building off of the survival point, that you could say is survival and reproduction. So all living things want to reproduce, naturally speaking. I know that there's some people who probably argue that they don't want to have children and things like that, and maybe that would happen like very, very rarely in nature. But when a human's in a natural state and they're healthy, pretty much all people are very similar. They would all be, decently attractive individuals. They would all be very healthy individuals, because it would be survival of the fittest, essentially, right? So it just makes sense why it would essentially, you would look at, like, for example, deers surviving in the wild, or lions and things like that, and you would equate it to how it would be like for humans. And those animals are only there and able to reproduce and thrive and survive somewhat because of chance and luck, if you want to say that, but it's because their genetics were superior um, than the genetics of other animals of their same species or whatever. So, which I guess is another point that only the strongest survive. Though there's some kind of luck to that too, because you might come across a situation that you can't really get out of, and not even the strongest, deer would be able to get out of or whatever. So yeah, those are kind of laws of nature. I might come back to this when I think of better things, but no, I guess another law or rule is that the sun is the basis of all life. Is that proper to say? Because I mean, we get plants, the plants get energy, and then the animals eat that, and then the humans eat the animals that eat the plants, or like the carnivores, which we are, eat the animals. So I guess technically, yeah, the sun is the beginning. It's the force that drives everything. I think that's probably appropriate to make that claim. So, yeah. All right, thanks for watching, guys.